I worked 2 jobs to pay rent because my best friend said our landlord was threatening to evict us, but I found out she was pocketing the extra money for herself. I sat at our kitchen table staring at the latest eviction notice my best friend Chloe had slid in front of me. My chest felt tight as I reread the bolded line for the 3rd time. Final warning. Payment overdue. She was standing over me, arms crossed, her voice cutting through the silence. Look, I don't want to be the bad guy here, but Mr. Brennan sent this directly to my email again. He's saying you're 3 weeks behind on your half. I picked up the printed email, scanning the official-looking header. Something about the font looked wrong. The spacing between letters seemed inconsistent, and the timestamp showed 11:73 p.m., which didn't make sense. But with Mia hovering there, tapping her foot impatiently, I kept my mouth shut. I thought I paid everything on time, I said quietly, pulling up my bank statements on my phone. I transferred you the money on the 1st, just like always. Mia sighed heavily and sat down across from me. I know you think you did, but apparently it wasn't enough. He's been really strict about late fees lately. Some new management company took over the building, and they're cracking down on everyone. She pulled out her phone and showed me a text message thread. The contact name read, Mr. Brennan, landlord, and the messages were brutal. Your roommate needs to pay the outstanding balance immediately or we'll begin eviction proceedings against both tenants. Another one below it, this is the final courtesy notice before we file with the court. When did he send these? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Yesterday afternoon, while you were at work. Mia set her phone down and leaned forward. Listen, I already covered the difference this month so we wouldn't get kicked out, but I can't keep doing this. My savings account is almost empty. The guilt hit me like a punch to the stomach. Chloe had been my closest friend since sophomore year of high school. When I needed a place after my last roommate moved out with 0 notice, she'd opened her door without hesitation. We'd been living together for 8 months and it had been perfect. Splitting groceries, cooking dinner together, staying up late watching terrible reality TV shows and laughing until we cried. How much do I owe? I asked, already dreading the answer. Well, between the late fees and the penalty charges, it's about $400 extra this month. But if we can get caught up, we should be fine going forward. Mia's expression softened slightly. I'm not trying to stress you out, but you know how impossible it is to find affordable places around here. I really don't want either of us to end up homeless. $400. That was almost my entire food budget for the month, and I was already stretched thin from my coffee shop job. I worked full-time, but between student loans and basic living expenses, there wasn't much left over. The thought of losing our apartment made my stomach churn. Can I talk to him directly? Maybe work out some kind of payment plan? I suggested, grasping for any solution that didn't involve me being completely broke. Chloe shook her head quickly. He specifically told me that all communication has to go through me since my name is on the lease. He doesn't want to deal with multiple people, especially after what happened with the previous tenants apparently causing drama. She stood up and walked toward the coffee maker. Look, I know it sucks, but maybe you could pick up some extra shifts, or do some freelance work on the weekends. I stared down at the printed email again. The letterhead said, Prestige Property Management, but something nagged at me. I'd never heard Chloe mention any management company before. When we'd first moved in, she'd always talked about Mr. Brennan like he was just a regular guy who owned the building, not part of some corporate operation. Did he say when this management company took over? I asked casually. A few weeks ago, I think, right around the time the rent issues started. Chloe poured herself coffee and didn't offer me any, which was weird since she always made enough for both of us. That's probably why everything's been so strict lately. Corporate policies and all that. The whole situation felt surreal. 3 hours ago, I'd been having a normal Tuesday morning, getting ready for work and humming along to music. Now I was apparently on the verge of eviction, scrambling to figure out how to come up with money I didn't have. The worst part was seeing the disappointment in Mia's eyes every time she looked at me. Okay, I said finally, folding the email and sliding it into my purse. I'll figure something out. Maybe I can ask for overtime at the shop or see if anyone needs tutoring help. Chloe's face brightened immediately. Really? That would be amazing. I hate having to be the rent police, but I can't afford to cover both of us long term. She sat back down and reached across to squeeze my hand. We'll get through this. It's just a rough patch. As I headed to work that morning, the folded email felt like it was burning a hole in my bag. I kept replaying the conversation, trying to shake the feeling that something was off. But Chloe was my best friend. She had no reason to lie to me, and she'd already covered my supposed shortfall out of her own pocket. The least I could do was find a way to pay her back and make sure it never happened again. Looking back, I should have trusted my instincts from the beginning. Chloe and I had been inseparable since we met in Ms. Rodriguez's chemistry class junior year. We bonded over terrible pop music and shared anxiety about college applications. When everyone else was obsessing over prom dates, we were planning our post-graduation road trip to California. Living together had been her idea. Why waste money on random roommates when we already know we get along? She'd said, scrolling through apartment listings on her laptop. We were both 22, working entry-level jobs, and trying to figure out adult life in a city where rent ate half our paychecks. The apartment hunt took months. Every place we could afford was either a shoebox or had mysterious stains on the carpet. When we finally found our current place, a decent 2-bedroom with actual closet space, Chloe handled all the paperwork. Her credit score was better than mine, and she had references from previous rentals. I transferred her my half of the security deposit and first month's rent without question. Those first few months were exactly what I'd hoped for. We established routines that felt natural and comfortable. Chloe always made coffee strong enough to wake the dead, while I handled breakfast because she burned everything she touched. We'd split grocery runs, alternating who dealt with the crowds at the discount store on Sundays. Our Friday night tradition became sacred: cheap takeout and whatever ridiculous reality show we could find. Chloe had strong opinions about every contestant, and I'd end up laughing so hard I'd snort soda through my nose. She always knew exactly what to say when I had a rough day at work, and I thought I did the same for her. Money conversations were straightforward back then. We kept a shared spreadsheet for utilities and household expenses, splitting everything 50-50. Chloe usually collected the rent money from both of us and handled the payment, because Mr. Brennan preferred dealing with one person. It seemed logical, and I never questioned the arrangement. that. The first time she mentioned Mr. Brennan being particular about timely payments, I didn't think much of it. She said he'd mentioned something about previous tenants causing problems, so he was more strict now. That sounded reasonable enough. Landlords had every right to expect rent on time. I was always careful about transferring my share by the first of each month, sometimes even a few days early. My bank app showed the transfers going through successfully, and Chloe would always confirm she'd received the money. Got it, thanks, she'd text, usually with a thumbs up emoji. Our social lives intertwined completely. Her friends became my friends, and vice versa. We'd have people over for dinner parties that usually devolved into board game competitions that lasted until 2 in the morning. Chloe was always the perfect hostess, making sure everyone felt welcome and included. She knew all my insecurities and fears. When I worried about whether my boss actually liked my work, she'd reassure me with specific examples of compliments I'd mentioned. When I stressed about my student loan payments, she'd help me reorganize my budget and find ways to save money on non-essentials. That's what made everything that happened later so devastating. She knew exactly which buttons to push because I'd handed her the manual myself. Every vulnerable conversation we'd had about my financial anxiety became ammunition she could use against me. But during those early months, I felt lucky to have found such a perfect living situation. We never fought about dirty dishes or whose turn it was to buy toilet paper. When one of us was sick, the other would bring soup and medicine without being asked. It felt like the kind of friendship that would last forever. I trusted her completely with practical matters because she seemed more organized and responsible than I was. She kept track of lease renewal dates, scheduled maintenance requests, and handled all the communication with building management. When she told me Mr. Brennan preferred text messages over phone calls or that he wanted all rent discussions to go through her, it never occurred to me to verify any of it. The foundation of trust we'd built over years of friendship made me vulnerable in ways I didn't recognize at the time. When someone knows your deepest worries and has never given you reason to doubt them, you don't question their version of events. You assume they have your best interests at heart because that's what friendship means. The shift happened so gradually that I almost missed it entirely. About 3 months into our lease, Chloe started mentioning Mr. Brennan's messages more frequently. He texted again about keeping noise down after 10, she'd say casually while we were making dinner. Or, he wants us to be more careful about guests staying overnight too often. None of it seemed unreasonable at first. Landlords had rules, and we wanted to stay on his good side. But the messages always came when I wasn't around, and Chloe never offered to show me her phone when she mentioned them. Then came the first payment issue. I was rushing to get ready for work when Chloe knocked on my bedroom door looking worried. Hey, Mr. Brennan just texted me. He's saying the rent payment from last month was short by $50. I stopped brushing my teeth and stared at her in the mirror. Short? That's impossible. I transferred you my exact half. I know. But he's saying the total amount he received was $50 under what it should be. Chloe held up her phone showing me a text message. Maybe the bank fee was higher than usual, or there was some kind of processing error? The message looked official enough, though something about the font seemed slightly off. The timestamp showed it had been sent at 6:47 a.m., which seemed early for a landlord to be texting about rent. But I was already running late, and Chloe looked genuinely concerned. I'll call the bank during my lunch break and figure out what happened, I said, spitting out toothpaste. Can you tell him I'll get it sorted? Of course. I'll let him know you're handling it. Chloe's relief seemed genuine. Thanks for not making this a big deal. Some people would totally freak out. That afternoon, my bank confirmed that my transfer had gone through for the full amount I'd sent. When I told Chloe, she frowned and pulled up her phone again. That's so weird. Let me double check my account. She tapped through several screens, then showed me her banking app. Look, it says I only received this amount from you. The number on her screen was indeed $50 short of what I'd sent. I leaned closer, squinting at the small text, but everything looked legitimate. My confusion must have shown on my face because Chloe quickly added, "These things happen sometimes. Banks mess up transfers all the time. I'll just cover the difference this month and we can figure out how to prevent it next time." I don't want you to have to cover for me, I protested. Let me transfer the $50 right now. Are you sure? I mean, if it was a bank error, maybe we should wait and see if it gets corrected automatically. But I was already pulling up my banking app. The last thing I wanted was to cause problems with our landlord over $50. I sent the money immediately, and Chloe confirmed she'd received it. 2 weeks later, it happened again. This time, the shortage was $75, and Mr. Brennan's text messages seemed more frustrated. Chloe showed me a string of messages where he complained about tenants who can't manage basic financial responsibilities and warned that continued issues will result in late fees. I'm so embarrassed, Chloe said, genuinely looking uncomfortable. He's never had problems with me before, but now he's grouping us together. Like my payment history is getting dragged down because of these glitches. The guilt was immediate and overwhelming. Chloe had vouched for me when we applied for the apartment. Her good relationship with Mr. Brennan was part of why we'd gotten approved so quickly. If my banking issues were causing problems for her too, I needed to fix it immediately. I called my bank again, spent 40 minutes on hold, and eventually spoke to a representative who insisted all my transfers had gone through correctly. But when I relayed this to Chloe, she just shrugged helplessly. I don't know what to tell you. The money that shows up in my account is what shows up. Maybe it's something on your bank's end that they're not admitting to. She showed me another text from Mr. Brennan. If payment issues continue, I'll have no choice but to start the formal documentation process for lease violations. The phrase formal documentation process made my stomach drop. I'd heard horror stories about tenants getting evicted over minor issues, and the rental market in our city was brutal. Finding another affordable place would be nearly impossible. What if I just start sending you a little extra each month? I suggested. Like an extra $100, just to make sure we're always covered? Chloe's face brightened immediately. That's actually not a terrible idea. It would give us a buffer in case these weird banking things keep happening. She paused, then added more softly, I really appreciate you being so understanding about this. this. I know some roommates would be defensive or blame me for the landlord's attitude. I sent an extra $100 that same day. For the rest of the month, there were no complaints from Mr. Brennan. When I mentioned this to Chloe, she seemed relieved. See? Problem solved. He's been much more relaxed in his messages lately. I think having that buffer really helped. But the following month brought a new issue. Chloe knocked on my door early on a Saturday morning, holding her phone with a concerned expression. I hate to bug you about this again, but Mr. Brennan is saying the utilities payment bounced. He's pretty upset because it means we'll get hit with late fees from the electric company. I sat up in bed, immediately alert. Bounced? But I haven't had any overdraft notifications. He says it was the check I wrote him for utilities, but I used money from our shared account, so if there wasn't enough in there. She trailed off, looking uncomfortable. We'd set up a shared checking account for utilities and household expenses, with both of us contributing equally each month. I pulled up the account on my phone and saw that my contribution from the previous month was there, along with Chloe's. There's definitely enough money in the account, I said, showing her the screen. Chloe frowned and took my phone, studying the numbers. That's so strange. Let me call the bank and see what happened with the check. 20 minutes later, she returned with an explanation that made my head spin. According to the bank representative she'd spoken to, there had been a processing delay that temporarily made the funds unavailable when the check was processed. The timing was just unlucky. So basically, we need to keep more money in that account as a cushion, Chloe concluded. The bank suggested maintaining at least a few hundred extra to avoid these timing issues. I transferred $300 into the shared account that afternoon. It seemed like a reasonable precaution, and I trusted Chloe's explanation. She'd dealt with more banking complications than I had, and she'd never steered me wrong before. Looking back, I realize how perfectly each incident was designed to make me feel responsible, while appearing completely innocent on Chloe's part. Every problem had a plausible explanation, and she always seemed just as frustrated as I was. The solutions she suggested always involved me sending more money, but they were framed as practical safeguards rather than demands. By the 4th month of living together, I was sending Chloe an extra $200 every month on top of my regular rent contribution. The financial strain was getting harder to ignore, especially when my car needed repairs I couldn't afford. I mentioned to Chloe that I might need to dip into the rent buffer for the car emergency. "Oh no, you can't do that," she said immediately, looking genuinely alarmed. "Mr. Brennan has been so much more relaxed since we started keeping that cushion. I'd hate to risk going back to all those angry messages." She pulled up her phone and showed me what appeared to be a recent text from him. "Thank you for resolving the payment consistency issues. Professional tenants like yourselves are exactly what I'm looking for in long-term renters." The message felt like both a compliment and a threat. I couldn't risk jeopardizing our housing situation over car repairs, so I put the expenses on a credit card instead. The debt bothered me, but it seemed like a temporary solution until I could save up the extra money. That's when Chloe started mentioning the rent problems to other people. It began subtly during a group dinner with our mutual friends. Someone made a joke about being broke, and Chloe laughed while saying, "Tell me about it. I've been covering extra expenses lately while my roommate works through some banking issues." The comment felt like a punch to the gut, but everyone moved on quickly to other topics. Later that night, I asked Chloe about it privately. "I wasn't trying to embarrass you," she said, looking hurt. "I was just venting about money being tight. I didn't think you'd mind since we talk about it all the time anyway." Her explanation made sense, and I felt guilty for being sensitive about it. She was dealing with financial stress because of my supposed banking problems. Of course, she needed to vent to friends sometimes, but then it happened again at a different gathering, and again when we ran into our friend Rebecca at the grocery store. Each time, Chloe's comments were just vague enough to avoid giving specific details, but clear enough to paint me as financially unreliable. "How's the living situation going?" Rebecca asked during our chance encounter. "It's good overall," Chloe replied with a slight sigh. "There have been some hiccups with rent stuff, but we're working through it, right?" She looked at me expectantly. I nodded and smiled, but internally I was mortified. Rebecca was part of our larger friend group, and I didn't want her thinking I was the kind of person who couldn't manage basic adult responsibilities. The worst part was that Chloe always framed these comments in a way that made her look patient and understanding. She never directly criticized me. Instead, she positioned herself as the supportive friend dealing with my unfortunate circumstances. When I finally worked up the courage to ask her to stop mentioning our rent situation to others, she looked genuinely surprised. "I had no idea it was bothering you. I thought we were being open about it since it's affecting both of us." She paused, then added more gently, "But I totally understand wanting to keep it private. I won't bring it up anymore." I felt better after that conversation, but the damage was already done. I started noticing subtle changes in how some friends interacted with me. When we'd split dinner bills, people would quickly offer to cover my portion just this once, if I took more than a few seconds to get my wallet out. The assumption that I was struggling financially had become part of how they saw me. Meanwhile, the rent issues were supposedly getting worse. Chloe showed me increasingly frustrated messages from Mr. Brennan, complaining about continued irregularities and threatening to reconsider the lease arrangement if problems persisted. "I think he might be looking for an excuse to get rid of us," Chloe said one evening, scrolling through what appeared to be a long email thread. "The rental market is so hot right now that he could probably charge twice as much for this place." The thought of losing our apartment terrified me. Finding another place in our budget would be nearly impossible, and I'd already invested so much emotionally in making our current space feel like home. I offered to increase the monthly buffer to $300. "Are you sure you can afford that?" Chloe asked, though she looked relieved. "I don't want you to put yourself in a bad financial position." I wasn't sure I could afford it, but I also couldn't afford to be homeless. I took on extra shifts at work, started eating more meals at home to save money, and canceled my gym membership. The combination of longer hours and constant financial stress was exhausting, but it seemed like the only way to keep our housing secure. Around this time, Chloe began making small comments about my reliability in other areas. "You forgot to pick up milk again," she'd say when friends were over, with a tone that suggested this was part of a larger pattern. Or, I had to remind her 3 times about the electric bill when discussing household management with someone on the phone. None of these individual comments were particularly harsh, but they accumulated into a narrative about me being scattered and irresponsible. The worst part was that I couldn't argue with them because they were often technically true. I had forgotten the milk, and she had reminded me about the electric bill, but she was framing isolated incidents as representative of my character. I started second-guessing myself constantly. Was I actually being a terrible roommate? Were my financial problems causing more stress for Chloe than I realized? The self-doubt was exhausting, and it made me even more determined to fix whatever was wrong with my banking situation. When I suggested switching banks entirely to see if that would resolve the transfer problems, Chloe seemed hesitant. "I mean, you could try that," she said slowly. "But what if the same issues happen with a new bank? Then we'll know it's something else causing the problem." She pulled up her phone and showed me another angry text from Mr. Brennan. "He's already pretty frustrated with us. If we have more payment problems while you're transitioning banks, it might be the final straw." Her logic seemed sound, even though part of me wondered how she could be so certain about Mr. Brennan's patience level. But I trusted her judgment about tenant-landlord relationships, since she'd been handling most of our communication with him. Instead of switching banks, I decided to get a second job. If the problem was that I didn't have enough cushion in my account to handle timing issues, then earning more money would solve it. I found weekend shifts at a retail store, which meant working 7 days a week, but it would give me the financial buffer I needed. When I told Chloe about the second job, she looked concerned. "Are you sure that's sustainable? You're already working full-time during the week. I don't want you to burn yourself out because of these banking glitches." But I was determined to prove that I could be a reliable roommate and tenant. The extra income would cover the increased rent buffer and give me peace of mind about our housing situation. I just had to get through the next few months until everything stabilized. Working 7 days a week was brutal, but the extra money helped ease my anxiety about rent. For a few weeks, things seemed calmer. Chloe stopped showing me angry messages from Mr. Brennan, and I started to believe we'd finally solved the problem. Then I got sick. Nothing serious, just a bad cold that left me exhausted and unable to work my weekend retail shifts. I called in sick on Saturday morning, planning to spend the day resting and recovering. Around noon, I decided to venture out for soup and medicine. The corner pharmacy was only 3 blocks away, and I thought the fresh air might help. I was shuffling down the street in my pajamas and a hoodie when I spotted a familiar figure coming out of the coffee shop across from the pharmacy. Mr. Brennan, our landlord, the man I'd supposedly been disappointing for months with my unreliable rent payments. For a moment, I considered crossing the street to avoid him. The last thing I wanted was an awkward encounter while I looked like a mess and felt terrible. But then I realized this might be the perfect opportunity to apologize directly and assure him that the payment issues were resolved. I took a deep breath and walked over to him. "Mr. Brennan, hi, I'm Chloe's roommate. I just wanted to say I'm really sorry about all the rent complications we've had. I know it's been frustrating, but I think we've got everything sorted out now." He looked at me with genuine confusion, like he was trying to place who I was. "I'm sorry, rent complications? I'm not sure what you mean." My stomach dropped. "The late payments and banking issues? The messages you've been sending Chloe about payment problems?" Mr. Brennan shook his head slowly. "I haven't sent any messages about payment problems. Your rent has been paid on time every month. Actually, you're paid up 3 months in advance right now." The world seemed to tilt sideways. 3 months in advance? Yeah, your roommate has been consistently paying early and extra. I figured you two were just being cautious or maybe saving up to move somewhere nicer. He studied my face, which must have looked stricken. "Is everything okay?" I mumbled something about a misunderstanding and practically ran back to the apartment. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what he'd said. 3 months in advance, paid early and extra, no payment problems. Back home, I sat on my bed staring at the wall, trying to process the implications. If there were no payment issues, then why had Chloe been showing me all those angry messages? Why had I been sending her hundreds of extra dollars every month? I needed to see those messages again. All of them. Chloe was at work, so I went to our shared computer in the living room. She used it more than I did, mainly for streaming shows and online shopping. I'd never snooped through her files before, but something was seriously wrong, and I needed answers. I opened her email account, which she'd left logged in. The search function made it easy to find emails from Mr. Brennan. There were several, but they were all routine messages about building maintenance, lease renewal dates, and holiday schedules. Nothing about late payments or angry complaints. But that didn't make sense. I'd seen the emails she'd shown me. They had to be somewhere. I spent 20 minutes clicking through various folders, getting increasingly confused and frustrated. Then I noticed a folder labeled Documents, Personal, that I hadn't checked yet. Most of the files inside were things like tax documents and old resumes, but one subfolder caught my attention. Apartment stuff. Inside that folder, I found something that made me freeze. 2 versions of the same email from Mr. Brennan, saved with slightly different names. The first was titled Brennan Original, and the second was Brennan Edited. I opened both files with trembling fingers. The original email was a friendly message thanking Chloe for being such a reliable tenant and mentioning that our consistent early payments were appreciated. The edited version was the angry, threatening message she'd shown me about payment irregularities and lease violations. I scrolled through the rest of the folder, finding more pairs of files. Original messages about routine building updates, and edited versions that complained about noise violations we'd supposedly committed. Friendly texts thanked for being good tenants, and fake versions demanding immediate payment for mysterious fees. Every single problem Chloe had shown me had been manufactured. Every angry message, every threat, every crisis that had sent me into financial panic, all of it was fake. The folder contained dozens of these edited communications, organized by date. I could see the pattern now. Whenever she needed more money from me, a new crisis would appear. The sophistication was stunning. She'd matched fonts, adjusted timestamps, and even created fake phone numbers that appeared to be from Mr. Brennan. But the most damaging discovery was at the bottom of the folder, a spreadsheet titled Budget Personal. It tracked all the extra money I'd been sending her, month month by month. The total was over $1,500. Next to it was another spreadsheet labeled trip planning, with expenses for flights, hotels, and activities for a week-long vacation. She'd been planning a vacation with my money. Money I'd earned working 7 days a week. Money I'd borrowed from credit cards. Money I'd stressed and sacrificed to provide because I thought our housing was at risk. I sat back in the chair, staring at the screen. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. For months, I'd been living in a manufactured crisis, working myself to exhaustion to solve problems that didn't exist. My best friend had been systematically lying to me, stealing from me, and letting me believe I was the problem. The worst part was how calculated it all was. The folder contained notes about my personality and vulnerabilities. Hates conflict, will pay extra to avoid confrontation, anxious about housing stability, leverage eviction fears, trusts completely, won't verify independently. She'd studied me like a psychology experiment, identifying exactly which buttons to push to make me comply. Every conversation we'd had about my financial anxiety, every insecurity I'd shared about being a responsible adult, she'd turned all of it into weapons to use against me. I heard keys jingling in the hallway and quickly closed all the windows, but not before taking screenshots of the most damaging files with my phone. Chloe walked in a few minutes later, carrying takeout bags and looking cheerful. Hey, feeling any better? I brought you soup from that place you like. She seemed so normal, so caring. If I hadn't just seen the evidence with my own eyes, I would never have believed she was capable of such elaborate deception. But now I could see it clearly. The concerned expression that was perfectly performed, the thoughtful gesture that was probably just guilt management. Thanks, I managed to say. That's really sweet of you. Chloe set the food on the kitchen counter and started chattering about her day at work, completely unaware that I now knew everything. As I listened to her talk, I found myself analyzing every word, looking for signs of the manipulation that had been happening right under my nose for months. The hardest part was pretending everything was normal while my entire reality had just been shattered. The person I'd trusted most in the world had been systematically exploiting that trust for money. The financial stress that had been consuming my life was completely artificial. The reputation damage with our friends was based on lies she'd spread about problems that didn't exist. I needed time to figure out what to do next. But first, I had to sit through dinner with someone who'd been stealing from me while pretending to care about my well-being. The soup she'd brought me suddenly felt like another manipulation tactic, and I wasn't sure I could keep pretending much longer. I spent that entire night planning what I would say. Part of me wanted to confront Chloe immediately, but I knew I needed to be smart about this. She'd been manipulating me for months with careful precision, and I couldn't let emotion derail my chance to get answers and justice. The next morning, Chloe left for work as usual, giving me a cheerful wave and reminding me to rest up. As soon as her car disappeared around the corner, I went back to the computer and pulled up all the evidence again. This time, I took detailed screenshots and organized them into a folder on my phone. I also did something I probably should have done months ago. I called Mr. Brennan directly. Hi, this is Chloe's roommate again. I'm so sorry to bother you, but I need to ask you something important. Have you ever sent my roommate any complaints about late rent or payment problems? No, never, he said immediately. Like I told you yesterday, you've been model tenants. Your rent is always early and you pay extra almost every month. I've actually been meaning to ask if you want me to apply that overage to future months, or if you prefer I keep it as a security deposit buffer. My stomach dropped. Overage? How much extra have we been paying? Let me check. Looks like about $300 to $400 extra per month for the past several months. I assumed you were just being cautious or saving up for something. After I hung up, I sat in the kitchen staring at the evidence on my phone. The total amount Chloe had stolen from me was probably close to $2,000 when I added up all the extra payments, banking fees, and emergency buffers she'd convinced me to send. I decided to wait until evening to confront her. I wanted her to feel comfortable and unsuspecting, the same way she'd kept me for months. When Chloe came home that night, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open. She breezed in carrying takeout again, chattering about her day. How are you feeling? You look better, she said, setting down the food. I got us that Thai place you like. Actually, I need to talk to you about something, I said calmly. Can you sit down? Something in my tone must have alerted her because her cheerful expression faltered slightly. Sure, what's up? I turned the laptop screen toward her. It was displaying the folder I'd found, with 2 email files clearly visible. Brennan Original and Brennan Edited. The color drained from Chloe's face, but she tried to recover quickly. What is this? I don't understand what you're showing me. These are the emails you've been editing to make me think Mr. Brennan was angry about late payments. The originals are actually thanking us for being good tenants. Chloe stared at the screen for a long moment, then looked back at me with what appeared to be genuine confusion. I don't know how those got there. Maybe there was some kind of computer glitch? Or someone hacked into the email account? I clicked through several more pairs of files, showing her the pattern of originals and edited versions. With each click, her excuses became more desperate. This is crazy. Why would I do something like this? We're best friends. I would never lie to you about something so serious. I also talked to Mr. Brennan directly, I said quietly. Yesterday, and again today. He confirmed that we've never had payment problems. In fact, he said we've been paying $300 to $400 extra every month. Chloe's face went completely white. She opened her mouth several times without any sound coming out, then finally whispered, "You talked to him directly?" He told me our rent is paid up 3 months in advance. He was confused about why I was apologizing for late payments that never happened. The silence stretched between us. I could see Chloe's mind racing, trying to find a way out of this. Finally, she seemed to deflate. Okay, look, I can explain, she said, her voice taking on a pleading tone. I've been having some financial problems that I didn't want to tell you about. My credit card debt got out of control and I was behind on some bills. I didn't know how else to ask for help. So you decided to lie to me for months? To make me work a second job and stress about being homeless? I was going to pay you back. I just needed some time to get caught up. The extra money you were sending was just just a temporary loan. I scrolled down to show her the vacation planning spreadsheet. A temporary loan for a trip to Europe? Chloe stared at the screen, and I watched the last of her fight drain away. How did you find all this? It was in your files. You saved everything. I leaned forward. Chloe, you didn't just take my money. You made me doubt myself. You damaged my reputation with our friends, and you let me believe I was a terrible roommate and tenant. Do you understand how much stress you put me through? She started crying, but I couldn't tell if the tears were genuine or another manipulation tactic. I'm so sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. It started small, and then I couldn't figure out how to stop without admitting what I'd done. You could have stopped any time by telling me the truth. I was scared you'd hate me. I was scared I'd lose you as a friend. She wiped her eyes with her sleeve. Can we figure out a way to fix this? I can pay you back, maybe set up a payment plan? I closed the laptop and looked at her directly. Chloe, you spent months lying to my face every single day. You made me think I was crazy when I questioned things that didn't make sense. You manipulated me using things I told you in confidence about my financial anxiety. This wasn't a mistake or a small lie that got out of hand. This was a deliberate, calculated scheme. But we're friends. We've been friends for years. That has to count for something. Friends don't do this to each other. Friends definitely don't do this and then act concerned about the stress they're causing while continuing to take money. I stood up and walked toward my bedroom. I'm moving out this weekend. I'll find somewhere else to stay until I can get my own place. Wait, please. We can work this out. I'll pay you back everything with interest. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I turned back to her. You can start by paying me back every cent you stole, but that doesn't change the fact that our friendship is over. I can't trust you, and I can't live with someone who would do this to me. Chloe followed me to my room, alternating between apologies and excuses. I was just in such a bad financial situation. You don't know what it's like to be desperate like that. I thought if I could just get ahead on my bills, everything would be fine. You weren't desperate, Chloe. Desperate would have been asking me for help honestly. What you did was predatory. She tried several more approaches over the next hour. She offered to give me the apartment and move out herself. She promised to get therapy and work on her problems. She even suggested we could both stay and just pretend this never happened. But I was done. Every word she said just reinforced how manipulative she was, even in the face of being caught completely. She was still trying to manage my emotions and control the outcome instead of taking genuine responsibility for what she'd done. I started packing that night, and by morning I'd filled 3 suitcases with essentials. A friend from work offered me her couch until I could find my own place, and I was grateful to have somewhere to go that felt safe. As I was loading my car, Chloe made one final attempt. I know you're angry right now, but I hope someday you can forgive me. What we had was real, even if I made some terrible mistakes. I looked at her standing in the doorway of the apartment I'd thought was our shared home. The friendship we had was real for me, but apparently it wasn't for you, or you never could have done this. I drove away without looking back, leaving her to figure out how to cover the full rent on her own. 3 weeks later, I was settled into a small studio apartment across town. It wasn't as nice as the place I'd shared with Chloe, but it was mine, and every penny of rent I paid was legitimate. For the first time in months, I could sleep without anxiety about fake eviction notices or manufactured financial crises. Chloe tried to contact me several times through mutual friends, always with offers to make things right or requests to talk things through. I ignored all of it. She'd had months to make things right by telling me the truth, and she'd chosen deception instead. I learned through Rebecca that Chloe had scrambled to find a replacement roommate but couldn't afford the full rent on her own until someone moved in. She'd apparently told people I'd moved out unexpectedly due to personal issues, but I didn't bother correcting the story. Anyone who really mattered would hear the truth from me directly. The money Chloe stole was never repaid, despite her promises. I wrote it off as an expensive lesson about trust and moved on. Working one job again instead of 2 gave me my life back, and I realized how much of my stress and exhaustion had been completely unnecessary. Looking back, I'm almost grateful for the experience. It taught me to trust my instincts when something feels off, to verify important information independently, and to recognize manipulation tactics I'd never encountered before. Most importantly, it showed me that not everyone who claims to care about you actually has your best interests at heart. I never saw Chloe again, but I heard she eventually moved back in with her parents. Sometimes I wonder if she learned anything from the experience, but mostly I just feel relieved that chapter of my life is over. The relief of walking away was worth far more than the money she stole.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and drop your favorite part in the comments. See you in the next one.